know is Rachel would not be away this long without contacting someone. And we do know that wherever she is, that she's not there by choice.
Are you gonna take a picture?
This is 18-year-old Rachel Burkheimer. She'd gone through a tough year, but she was starting to find happiness again. Her family was happy for her. They had always supported her, no matter what she chose to do. She was a shining star until a terrible person stole that away. He manipulated her into a terrifying relationship that would end in the worst way imaginable. This is the full story of Rachel Burkheimer. Rachel Burkheimer called the 22,000-acre two-lap reservation in Snohomish County, Washington, her home. She lived, worked, and went to high school there. On September 27, 2002, 18-year-old Rachel told her parents she was driving a friend to the airport, but she never got back home. By the end of the day, her family reported her missing. The Burkheimer family rallied together and distributed missing person posters everywhere in the Snohomish and King counties. They wanted to help law enforcement as much as possible. Detectives received tons of tips. However, you know how it goes with tips. 90% of them are usually dismissible, and you have to spend hours pursuing each one until you can cross it out. Still, this wasn't New York City. Rachel lived in a fairly small community. People her age knew each other, and their parents knew about their everyday affairs too. So the first break in the case was when a tip was received from someone identifying herself as Jeffrey Barth's mother. Jeffrey's mother told the officers to look for a red Jeep registered to Matthew Durham. The 17-year-old was arrested just a few days after Rachel's disappearance. He was interrogated by Sergeant Scott Fenter of the Snohomish County Sheriff's Office. The sergeant didn't have time for teenagers' lies. He knew exactly how to pressure him into speaking.
Matthew Durham's vehicle was used to transport Rachel and some of the other defendants up into the mountains where she was ultimately killed and buried.
He needed to throw other people under the bus fast if he didn't want to be the only one arrested for snatching and killing Rachel. Scott Fentner also appealed to his humane side.
Confronted him with the fact that I believed he knew where Rachel was and that he would be the one that could bring her home.
In less than an hour, Matthew Durham started talking. He even led the detectives to the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. There, they found a shallow gravesite off Ryder Road, east of Gold Bar. In early October, Rachel's remains were found.
We just found what was human flesh.
Matthew proceeded to tell the detectives what had happened in a certain garage on September 27th. It was stomach-turning. Matthew seemed remorseful. He said he was ordered by John Diggy Anderson to drive his vehicle to a remote spot near Ryder Pit, a popular place for off-road vehicles, where he was told to drive down a dirt road. Matthew also told investigators that Diggy told him where to stop. Then, Diggy carried the duffel bag into the woods where he could hear him say, "Get on your knees," and then heard gun sounds and saw muzzle flashes. When they all returned to the vehicle, Matthew was ordered not to speak of the horrific event, or he would face the same fate. That day, 8 people were linked to Rachel's gruesome death. Among them were her boyfriend and her best friend.
Get Brandon. Yeah, Brandon's never been filmed.
Rachel Burkheimer was born in Everett, Snohomish County in 1984. She didn't start talking until she was 3 years old. Her parents thought she might be deaf, but once she started talking, she became the star of the family.
I honestly think that she just was born with that incredible spirit. I do.
She had a big imagination, was good at imitations, and had a range of funny voices that kept her family amused and entertained. Her dad, Bill, said, "She was so theatrical and creative. I think that's how she lived her life. I don't want to say it was a fantasy, but it was kind of like she was a character in a bigger cast or of some ongoing saga." Rachel's family described her as funny, giving, and a prankster. Her smile could light up any room, and her kindness stood out, especially for someone her age. She never forgot a birthday and randomly sent cards to her family and friends, telling them she loved them. She was outgoing and made friends easily, even organizing a baby shower for a coworker who was only a casual acquaintance.
Are you gonna take a picture?
Rachel's mom, Denise, also had a lot of fond memories of her.
She's just so precious, such a special person, always bubbly and happy.
I was the rebel rouser, and she was the good girl.
I read that she was very athletic, that at 6 years old she could outshoot the boys in the basketball court.
She was like a little bullet, and everybody's going, who is that girl?
Rachel's energy stood in stark contrast to her height. She stood at just 4'11". Her family saw her as a future performer.
She very well could have been on stage or had a great career in that regard.
She always had big dreams, and she wanted to be a veterinarian. She loved animals. She wanted to be an actress.
But in 2001, Rachel said she wanted to become a medical technician. Her family supported whatever she wanted to do. They knew that whatever goal she chose, she would give it her all, and she would shine at it. But that year, everything changed for Rachel. In August 2001, Rachel lost one of her best friends, Corey Haynes, in a horrific rollover car accident. She took the death extremely hard and, in her grief, attached his pictures all over her Subaru dashboard and room. She hung his obituary on her bedroom wall.
She wasn't her happy, bubbly self, and she was suffering tremendously from grief.
Corey and Rachel were never romantically involved, but they saw each other as soulmates.
They were the classic soulmates. It was a brother-sister relationship. He was an amazing young man.
They spent every day together. They shared all their secrets with each other. It was like losing her twin brother.
It was truly like a transformation that was happening before our eyes. It was, the Rachel that I knew was very much changing in her priorities.
Then came even more tragedies. In a shocking twist, in just 1 year, Rachel lost 6 friends, and their causes of death were all horrible. She was just 17 at the time. Imagine losing this many people in these ways in such a short time frame. Rachel's sister Megan said, "It was so hard. I think it killed her, literally. She just became so heartbroken. You could see it in her eyes. Her light was gone." In just a few months, Rachel went from a studious, passionate girl with big dreams to a detached, addicted, vulnerable teen, prone to the worst kind of influence. Although her parents took her to see a therapist, Rachel did not continue her sessions, and she decided to drop out of school too. She started attending an alternative school but dropped out from there too. At that time, she also had a job at Jimmy's Pizza and Pasta. She continued her job after dropping out from school for another month or so. Then, she quit that too. Sadly, Rachel also drifted away from her family.
Did you feel helpless?
I did because, I would try to talk to her and try to connect with her and sympathize with her and advise her as we do as sisters. And I felt unsuccessful.
Instead of seeking support from her parents and sister, Rachel retreated into her own world, and then she sought comfort elsewhere. Rachel started using white powder and amphetamine. Bill would regularly confront her about her use and urge her to get a new job or enroll in school again. But all the arguments would end the same way, with Rachel retreating into her own room or leaving the house. Then, Rachel found herself a boyfriend. Well, to call him a boyfriend would be too nice. He was the scum of the earth. John Anderson had been in and out of jail all his life. Now he was part of a small gang of users and thieves. Detective Brad Pintz said the gang was kind of in the infant stages.
It was a real stupid name. They called themselves the Northwest Mafia. They'd steal, they'd sell some of them and use most of it.
How could Rachel even come in contact with this guy?
What did she tell you about John Anderson when she met him?
She didn't tell me anything about John Anderson. I found out about John Anderson pretty much the hard way.
What was the hard way? A shocking phone bill.
I got a phone bill one day for $640. I look at this phone bill, I'm in shock. It says Correctional Facility, Shelton, Washington.
It's unclear whether Rachel met John before he was sent to prison again, or while he was an inmate. In any case, he had inserted himself into her life forcefully and manically. From the very beginning of their so-called relationship, he was alarmingly possessive and obsessed with her. He would write her jealous letters, despairing over the thought of seeing her with other guys.
I don't know any other way of showing you that you are so special to me
I would murder 1,000,000 people if I had to, just to be with you.
Like any worried parent, Bill confronted his daughter.
She kept talking about how she saw the good in him and he wasn't what people think he is.
You referred to John as being her bad boy, like every girl dates a bad boy, and that's how you...
That's what I thought. I thought this is her bad boy.
Did she not see his behavior and criminal record as a huge red flag? But John wasn't the bad guy from the 1990s teenage movies, the high schooler dressed in black smoking behind the school. He was a criminal with severe rage and jealousy issues. Once out of jail, he would sniff Rachel's hair and clothes just to make sure she hadn't seen other men. Rachel's sister Megan saw bruises on her. When she asked her about them, Rachel didn't want to talk about it, but Megan knew she was in too deep and she was afraid of John by now. According to Rachel's friends, in 2002, she was trapped in a love-hate roller coaster with John Anderson. It was a hot-cold situation, and these are, in many respects, the worst. If it's just cold, you know you have to get out. But when he's warm and cuddly too, you end up yearning for those moments and enduring the horrible ones. Quick note, don't! If they're like that, run! Finally, as summer turned to fall in 2002, Rachel was beginning to see the end of her relationship.
She sat on the end of my bed and she was talking to me until 2 a.m. about her fears, about her concerns, about John Anderson and the different threats that he had been giving her.
The Burkheimers were over the moon. They could see Rachel was coming to her senses. They even saw her blossom again, if only a little bit.
The two of you started to spend time together, going to church.
Yes.
Things were changing for her.
And she seemed to be more normal, and she'd come over and visit me and call, and we just had a regular relationship again, and it was nice.
Rachel's sister, Megan, had a toddler, and Rachel was finally spending time with them again. But Rachel made new friends outside of her family too.
One morning, a beautiful sunny morning, she's sitting on our porch, and she has this radiance again that I've not seen for a few months. And she looked up and said, I have met an incredible friend. His name is Maurice.
18-year-old Maurice Rivas was also a member of the Northwest Mafia. But just like Rachel, he wanted out. Together, they made a bond in their goal to break free.
Maurice Rivas was 18 years old. He also grew up in a troubled home. I think his closest relative was a grandmother. He was in the foster kid system for several years.
She said, we've decided we're going to go back to school. We're going to go graduate. We're going to walk with our class, and we're going to do it right.
Sounded amazing. If she wouldn't listen to her family, she at least listened to her new friend. It seemed like she was on the right track to healing and getting away from John. But they never anticipated how John would react to her decision. As Rachel was pulling away, John was attempting to win back her affection. Sadly, Rachel fell for it.
I thought, this is just a phase. A lot of teenagers go through this. She'll get out of it.
Then they temporarily broke up again, and Rachel started dating one of John's friends.
She was a party girl. She wanted to have fun. She wanted everybody around her to have fun.
But if John Anderson was frighteningly jealous when he had no reason, imagine what he felt now that his ex was trying out his fellow gang members. In an attempt to get other gang members to turn on Rachel, John told them that Rachel was passing on gang secrets to her friends. With this, he signed her death sentence. In September, Rachel asked her sister for advice. Someone in the gang had told her there was a on her head.
I told her, okay, look, you need to be aware. You need to be cautious. Stay away from him, for sure. But I just thought, he's some dumb young punk.
Megan didn't take John seriously. She genuinely believed if Rachel stayed away from him, he wouldn't come after her. At the end of September, Rachel attended a party at Everett Duplex. 7 people from the gang were there. Rachel was getting ready to leave that group, but she thought it was a good tactic to appear as though she was still loyal to them. Since they were now convinced she was sort of a traitor, she felt she had to prove otherwise before she cut ties with them for good.
They were all sitting around the couch having fun, tickling, giggling.
Later in the evening, John arrived at the party. Instead of joining in, he watched disgusted from afar. He was annoyed at how much fun people were having with Rachel. First, he took his anger out on a couple of the younger teens by attacking them. Within a few seconds, things got so heated that weapons were pulled out and pointed at each other. Rachel tried to leave, but as soon as John saw her, he pulled her back. He hit her repeatedly and then roped 2 other teenage boys to do the same. She was in the head over and over again. Instead of helping, someone else turned the stereo louder so that no one else could hear her screams.
They scooped up Rachel, took her out to the garage, gagged her and taped her so she couldn't scream anymore.
Then John and his friends started discussing plans. Should they all attack her in that garage? Or should they ask her dad for ransom money? They decided on neither. Instead, they ordered pizza, played video games, and got high. Meanwhile, Rachel was crying all by herself on the garage floor. Suddenly, the homeowner, Trista Connor, entered the garage and saw Rachel. Trista was the girlfriend of someone else in the gang, but she had no idea about what had just happened.
She went back to the kitchen to get a knife to try and get her hands and feet loose.
But John saw Trista and realized what she was trying to do, so he flew into a rage at her. Trista threatened to call 911, but the boys threatened her harder, and she backed down. By now they had a plan. They stuffed Rachel in a duffel bag and put her in the trunk of his Jeep. Someone suggested leaving her in a hotel room to heal. All Rachel could do is try and listen from the trunk and hope they showed her mercy. Remember her new bestie, Maurice? He did not intervene once to protect Rachel or save her from that garage. In fact, Maurice got into the car with John and 2 other boys. The 4 of them drove Rachel to the foothills of the Cascade Mountains. Once they parked, John and his 2 friends left to go get shovels. Shockingly, he left Maurice to guard Rachel. Even more shockingly, Maurice agreed, even though he knew perfectly well what getting shovels meant.
Told him that she knew that she was going to die and that she begged him that if that was the case, that she didn't want to be.
Maurice had several minutes to save Rachel's life, but he made no effort. Instead, he told her to calm down and that it wouldn't come to that. Did he genuinely refuse to see the evil side of his friends? Or was he so brainwashed into submission that he couldn't fathom going against John's word? Was he that afraid of him? When John and the others came back, they started digging. Someone put the duffel bag next to the hole they were digging, and John hit the bag with the shovel as hard as he could. But Rachel was still alive and conscious. Maurice was smoking and drinking a soda in the car, trying not to look at the scene. Then, John called him out and he came. As Maurice began helping with the digging, John told one of the other boys to take Rachel out of the bag and remove her clothes and jewelry. Rachel insisted that she do this herself.
They removed all of her rings and her necklace. She begged them to let her keep one ring that was given to her by a friend of hers that was killed in a car wreck. Anderson told her hell no.
In one last attempt to keep her dignity, Rachel said she would walk to her grave instead of getting dragged there. She got down on her knees and started to pray.
Anderson told her not to worry about it, that she'd be up there with him soon.
He was referring to her soulmate, Corey. Rachel watched her own grave being dug by someone who claimed that he loved her. Then the same man, together with someone she called her best friend, unalived her and threw her in. By the early days of October, when Rachel's remains were found and Matthew Durham was arrested, this was officially a homicide case. Rachel's family was devastated, but they knew they had to carry on to bring justice for their daughter.
For the Burkheimers, pure devastation.
I just knew it. I could just feel her presence gone.
Matthew led the officers to the burial site as well as the Everett duplex where it all happened. The evidence was overwhelming.
Bullets found at the gravesite matches this pistol, the gun that Rachel.
There were weapons, duct tape, jewelry belonging to Rachel, and her clothing that the gang tried to burn. Within a few days, 8 suspects were arrested. Proving how cowardly they were, they started turning on each other, hoping to get out of punishment themselves. So much for loyalty, which they claimed they took Rachel's life for.
They were really buffoons. That's the best way to describe them. There was a lot of planning that went into this, but it was very poor planning, and it didn't turn out well for them.
Buffoons that took an innocent life for the fun of it, and buffoons that did what a sociopathic maniac told them to without so much as questioning it. They all had so many opportunities not to join in, and yet they turned the music louder and partook until the very end. It's truly heartbreaking how little brain or empathy some people can have. 5 of the 8 took plea deals in exchange for a trial testimony. Nathan Lovelace received 30 days in prison, Tony Williams 9 years, and Jeffrey Barth 10 years. Durham, the first to be arrested, was sentenced to 26 years in prison, and Rachel's so-called friend, Maurice Rivas, received an equal sentence. John Whitaker helped dig Rachel's grave that night. He and John Anderson were sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Yusef Jihad was sentenced to 37 years for accompanying John on that trip and organizing the plan together with John. Imagine the Burkheimers' experience as they sat through 3 trials, all of which went over the stomach-turning details of Rachel's demise. Finally, it was time for the judge to address John Anderson.
Take a long, hard look around this courtroom today. This is the last group of decent, honorable, and free people you will ever see the rest of your life.
Rachel's family could not comprehend how arrogant and emotionless these men were.
Most of them were smug, and John Anderson was by far the worst. He was definitely mocking. He would turn around and wink at us. I would always go into that courtroom with the feeling that I'm the closest physical resemblance there is to her. And I want them to look at me, and I want them to see her. And I want it to haunt them.
Rachel's dad, Bill, said the sentences they received are not a win, just the end of a process. From then on, they could start healing. However, there can be little healing or solace when you think of Rachel's last year. First, she lost 6 friends, including someone she saw as her soulmate. Then her new best friends betrayed her, all of them.
Every person involved in this case had an opportunity to help Rachel, and they let her down.
When True Crime Daily reached John Anderson for an in-person interview, he replied with an incredibly narcissistic email. You may think that I'm the average self-absorbed criminal who thinks only about self, and that you can play off of that to get me to say whatever. He painted himself as a misunderstood victim and accused the journalist of trying to manipulate him. But painting yourself as a victim is a form of manipulation itself. No one wanted him to say whatever, just his version of things. This was happening 2 decades after Rachel's death. It's crazy that not even now, John isn't ready to apologize. Maurice, however, accepted the invitation to a phone interview.
It was really senseless, and it didn't need to happen, and it was just a horrible, horrible thing. A lot of it was fear. It just kept gripping me. That I was like, man, I was just really scared in a lot of points. I know that's like cowardice. I failed on an epic scale.
He's right, but this does nothing for Rachel's family now.
There is no closure. There is no... I'm trying to minimize my time in a emotional correctional facility. I'll never forget, I did see a photo of the gravesite, and there was, in the dirt, was an imprint of her hands in a praying position, perfectly preserved. And that gives me some peace.
But the Burkheimers didn't crumble into non-existence. Instead, Bill is working to raise awareness around other victims by working on legislation that would make it a crime to not render care for an injured person. On September 25th, 2007, the National Day of Remembrance for Murder Victims was held at the Capitol in Olympia, Washington. On that day, Bill presented a moving and raw declaration to the crowd attending. Insidious grief and pain are a direct result of losing a loved one to murder. This day shall be a day of grief relief. All survivors get a 1-day pass on pain, and no monsters can whisper in their ears. Some ignorant people who are shallow and narrow-minded enough to believe families who have had a loved one murdered have some kind of communicable disease will on this day finally realize that murder is not contagious. Furthermore, no doctor will think they can prescribe grief pills. There is no such thing. Crime victim organizations and support groups struggle to obtain adequate funding to maintain their vital role in our communities, and whose tireless efforts by dedicated and committed people bring strength and courage to friends and families of violent crime, shall on this day receive enough funding to effectively operate forever, or until there is no more violent crime, whichever comes first. The only way to move past something like this is to try to make sure it doesn't happen to anyone else. By helping others, Rachel's family is coping with a loss that will never make sense. Thanks for watching, you guys. What are your thoughts on this case? Do you know similar stories? Let me know in a comment below. And before you go, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit that bell button. See you next time.